Okay, so thanks for inviting me to this wonderful workshop. I'll be talking about deterministic polynomial time algorithm for the non-commutative rational identity testing problem over the field of rationals. I'll explain what that means, and this is joint work with Leonid Gurwitz, Rafael, and Avi Vitrasan. So here's a rough outline of the talk. I'll start with the introduction to polynomial identity testing and rational identity testing. So in fact, what we solve is some fundamental problem about symbolic matrices, which I'll then define, and finally I'll get to the algorithm and end with some conclusion and open problems. Okay. So let's start some PIT introduction. So I'm sure all of you know the usual setting of commutative polynomial identity testing. Here, the objects of study are polynomials in commuting variables y1 to ym over a field f and their representations. I mean, by representations, I mean this is a polynomial, and the polynomial can be represented either as an arithmetic circuit or arithmetic formula. And the problem is given two representations of as circuits or formulas. Check if the representations compute the same polynomial or not. Okay. And equivalently, you can check whether the representation computes the zero polynomial by just adding a subtraction gate at the top. And we know that there's an efficient randomized polynomial time algorithm for this problem. Schwarz-Zippel, Demelu-Lupton, and apparently Orr also independently proved in 1922. And you just plug random values for the variables, and deterministic polynomial time algorithm is a nature open problem. Okay. So this we all know. So now I'll move on to the non-commutative setting, which probably fewer people know about. Okay, so what is non-commutative polynomial identity testing? So here the objects of study are polynomials in non-commuting variables x1 to xm over a field f. Okay, and we want to study the representation. So it's worth noting that the variables are non-commuting among themselves, but they still commute with the underlying field. Okay. So examples of such polynomials are x1 x2 minus x2 x1. This is a zero polynomial in the commutative case, but it's a non-zero polynomial in the non-commutative case, and there's another polynomial. Okay. Again, the representation of a polynomial is given in form of an arithmetic circuit or an arithmetic formula. So the only difference from the commutative case is that each product gate also comes with a left edge and a right edge. Okay, and the multiplication has to be done in that order. Okay, otherwise it's just a usual model of an arithmetic circuit. And the question again is, given two representations as circuits or formulas, check if they compute the same polynomial or not. Okay. So now, so Raj and Spilka in 2005, they gave a deterministic polynomial time algorithm when the representation is a formula. Okay. In fact, when the representation is an ABP, they gave a deterministic polynomial time algorithm. For circuits, Bogdanov and V observed that 60-year-old theorem due to Amitsur and Levitsky. This implies a randomized polynomial time algorithm for the circuit representation. Okay, but when the degree is bounded by polynomials. So what you do in this case? So note that plugging random values from the field won't work. Okay. For example, you have the polynomial xy minus yx. This is a non-zero polynomial, but if you plug in random values from the field, this will always give you 0. But for this case, if you plug in random 2 by 2 matrices, it would still give you non-zero value with high probability. And this strategy actually works in general. Okay. So it's a theorem due to Amitsur and Levitsky. If P is a non-commutative polynomial of degree less than 2D, when you plug in random d by d matrices, this gives you a non-zero result with high probability. So if P is a polynomial degree, you plug in polynomial size dimension matrices, and this gives a randomized polynomial time.
For Amitsur, Levitsky would tell you, they won't talk about random. They would say that
yes.
Identity.
Yes,
is
you have to combine. You have to combine Amitsur-Levitsky theorem with Schwarz-Zippel.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The usual assumptions are there. The field is large. Okay. Yeah, and in fact, the 2D bound is tight. There exists a polynomial of degree 2D which vanishes on all d by d matrices. This is the standard polynomial. Okay. So this is the setting of non-commutative PIT. And again, deterministic polynomial time algorithm for circuits is open. Okay. Now moving on to rational identity testing. Okay, in the commutative case. So now our objects of studies are rational functions in commuting variables y1 to ym and their representations. Okay, so example of rational functions are just ratio of two polynomials, right? This is an example of a rational function, and their representations are again given by circuits and formulas. And in addition to multiplication and addition gates, you also have inverse gates in the circuit. Okay? So if you have an inverse gate, it will compute the inverse of the variable y. Okay? So these are arithmetic circuits and formulas with inverse gates. And the question again is, given a representation as circuits or formulas, check whether it's the zero polynomial, zero rational function or not. So you've probably never heard of this problem, right? For good reasons, because this basically reduces to just the normal PIT easily, right? You can always eliminate divisions from your circuit or formula in the commutative case. Okay. So commutative rational identity testing is nothing, just polynomial identity testing. There's nothing special going on. But in the non-commutative case, there's a big difference between rational identity testing and polynomial identity testing. Okay. So in non-commutative rational identity testing, the objects of study are non-commutative rational functions and their representations. Okay. So a non-commutative rational function may look like something this. So it's x1, x2 inverse plus x3 inverse, whole inverse plus x4 whole inverse. Okay. So there's no easy canonical form for these rational functions. Unlike in the commutative case, you cannot just write this expression as a ratio of two polynomials because these variables are non-commuting. So in general, there could be unbounded number of nested inversions. Okay. So it's easy to talk. So in this case, unlike the previous three cases, it's easy to talk about representations of these non-commutative rational functions rather than canonical forms. There's no easy canonical form. So again, representations are again formulas and circuit. And the question again is, given two non-commutative rational expressions as formula circuit, determine if they represent the same element. I haven't told you what does it mean to represent the same element, but this is the question. Okay, I'll define what it means to represent the same element, and it's a non-trivial thing, right? There's no easy canonical form in this case. So non-trivial, even to define does it mean that they represent the same element.
Does it mean if you put huge enough matrices, they would give the same?
Yes, that's one definition. That's how Amitsu defined it in '66, and it turns out that's the right definition. Okay? And that's the definition we're going to follow. Okay, so as Ketan already pointed out, we'll plug in matrices for these non-commuting variables. Okay. So now I'm going to define you what this thing really means. Okay, this is called the free skew field.
So if there are two expressions, and I mean, is there a way of just taking Amitsu-Levitsky's theorem and saying that if there is some non-commutative ring on which these two expressions differ, then it will differ on some 2D cross 2D matrix?
Yes, that is true, but the dimension could be exponential. Okay, and so yeah, before our work, only exponential bounds were known. We get around that and still give a polynomial time algorithm, but KV will talk about polynomial dimension bounds. That gives another way of solving this problem. Okay. Yes. Okay. So what is the free skew field? Now, you're given a rational expression that looks something like this. We'll define the domain of this rational expression as tuples of matrices of arbitrary dimension, such that when you plug in matrices for these variables, the computation is defined. Okay, what do you mean? So you plug in matrices and you start inverting things. So all the inversions that occur should be defined. Okay, you should get invertible matrices whenever there's an inverse outside. Okay. So is it clear what does it mean that R of T1 to Tm is defined?
So the principle could be empty, right?
It could be empty, right? Yes.
What is DOM?
Domain. Domain. Yes. Yes. Okay. So for example, if you consider this rational expression x1 x2 minus x2 x1 inverse, the domain of this rational expression is a tuples of matrices T1 T2. So the determinant of T1 T2 minus T2 T1 is non-zero. Okay. And it, as Christian pointed out, the domain could be empty. So I'll call an expression valid if the domain is non-empty. Okay. Otherwise, it's an invalid expression. All right. Now, what is the definition for two valid rational expressions to be equivalent? Ketan already pointed out they will be equivalent if the expressions when evaluated on tuples or matrices which lie in the intersection of their domains, the results come out to the same. Okay, so R1 of T1 to Tm equals R2 of T1 to Tm for all tuples or matrices in the intersection of domain of this rational expression. So this is the definition of two rational expressions to be equivalent. And what Amit proved was, if you consider the equivalence classes of this relation, then that forms a non-commutative field. So really the free skew field is you define this relation and you take the equivalence classes and I mean addition, multiplication are defined in an obvious way. Okay, that forms a field. Okay. I mean, so the only the non-trivial part in proving this theorem is this this part, that if the domain of a rational expression is non-empty and R is not equivalent to 0, then domain of R inverse is also non-empty. Okay. So this is a non-trivial theorem. This is what Amit proved, and that implies that equivalence classes of these rational expressions according to this relation form a non-commutative field.
What is a non-commutative field?
So it's just a field where you don't have the axiom of commutativity. Yes, for multiplication. Yes. Yeah. Or I guess it's also called a division ring. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, so you might argue that why do you have to plug in matrices? You might plug in values.
That it is an algebra, it's clear that R1 plus R2 will be there. It's obvious from this. The statement that also requires something. F is there, G is there, then F plus G is there.
F plus G seems okay.
F plus G, there is no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, basically, if you work on a finite field, you work over the extension, so the field is finite and all. So domains. So if the domains of two rational expressions are non-empty, the intersection will be non-empty. Like it's a dense set.
Okay.
You work over, let's say, infinite fields. If finite fields, you work over extensions.
So, okay.
Yes.
If one of R1 and R2 are not valid, then this is vacuously true.
I mean, we don't even define this for non-valid expressions. Yeah. We only work with valid
That was
rational
your
expressions.
concern then, I guess.
No, but if F might be there in my field, G might be there. I have to define it as G.
I mean, yeah, it's defined as a rational expression.
As a rational expression, it is defined, but
Yeah, and the domains will intersect. Yeah.
So that element has to
Yeah.
be present.
Yeah, domains will intersect. I mean, this is a dense set. The domain is a dense set once it's non-empty. Yeah. Okay, so you might argue that why do you have to plug in matrices? You might plug in elements from some other division algebra, and you form equivalence classes that might give you some other definition of this free skew field. Right? But it turns out, what I mean, again, Amit proved is that this is a universal thing to do. Okay, plugging in matrices of finite dimension is a universal thing, and that's why it's also called the universal free skew field. So this is the right definition of the free skew field. Okay, it's a universality property, and that's satisfied by this free skew field.
So as identity testing, this problem captures the normal non-commutative circuit identity test.
Well, it depends how you given the rational expression. If the rational expression is given as a formula, then it only captures the formula identity test.
It's given in circuit.
Yeah, then it captures. The normal thing is without division, and this is with division. Oh, okay.
So can you explain that universality?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Okay, so now the non-commutative rational identity testing is given to valid expressions, rational expressions, representations as formulas or circuits, are they equivalent? Okay, this is also known as the word problem for the free skew field. It's a really fundamental problem. You want to test if two representations of the free skew field actually are the same element or not. Okay, so there's a word problem, and again, it's the same as given a valid rational expression. Is it equivalent to 0? So in this case, it's not even clear if this problem is decidable, right? You will have to go to arbitrary dimension matrices to check equivalence. Okay. At first, it's not even clear it is decidable. So the fact that it's decidable already follows from structural results of Kohn in the 70s. I mean, formally it was written in this paper of Kohn and Rothenauer. So they reduced this problem to solving a system of commutative polynomial equations. Okay. So this puts this problem in p-space. For formula representations. But this is again exponential time algorithm. Several other algorithms are known, but again exponential time with or without randomness. Okay. So before our work, no polynomial time algorithm was known, even if you allow randomness. Okay. So our main result is, if the field is rational numbers, or you consider any field subfield of complex numbers, we give a deterministic polynomial time algorithm for this problem. Okay. For non-commutative rational identity testing, there is a deterministic polynomial time algorithm when the representation is a formula. Okay. Yes.
So, is it easy to see? Is it easier to check if a given rational expression is valid?
So, good question, but that's sort of you can do recursively, right?
I see. Okay.
Right.
Just kind of try to evaluate it.
Yeah. I mean, you check all the inversions in your formula are valid, right? The-
Then you use that because it's a dense set. If
Yes.
each of them are valid.
Yes.
That's fine.
Okay, so this is our work, and in the next talk, Kevi will explain a deterministic polynomial time algorithm which works over all large enough fields. Okay, so this is a work due to Ivanov, Shao, and Kevi. Okay. So, but for circuit representations, the best algorithms are still exponential time, even if you allow randomness. Even if in the circuit there are no divisions, only multiplication and additions, even then the best algorithms are exponential, okay, if you don't bound the degree of the polynomial. And this is a very natural open form. Okay, so that was introduction to non-commutative rational identity testing. Are there any questions?
Did you say that there is a degree part? The randomized algorithm is
For circuits?
Yeah.
Yes, but if you don't bound the degree of the polynomial, then still it's exponential.
If you bound that with the polynomial, even
Then
if
it's
it
up-
says it's randomized.
Even then it's randomized, yeah. But if you don't bound the degree, even randomized polynomial is not known. Okay, so now I move on to symbolic matrices. So we actually solve a harder problem than non-commutative rational identity testing, and I explain what it is. Okay. So our objects of study are matrices of the form summation xi ai. Xi are formal non-commuting variables, and a1 to am are n by n matrices over some field f. Okay. So in other words, you could also say that this matrix L has entries which are linear polynomials in variables x1 to xn. Okay. So these are objects of study. These are called symbolic matrices. We'll call such a matrix singular if its rank over the free skew field is smaller than n. Okay. What does that mean? The rank is smaller than n if this matrix has a factorization into k times m. K is a n by n minus 1 matrix, m is a n minus 1 by n matrix, and the entries of k and m are non-commutative rational functions. Okay. This is the definition of being singular. So it turns out Kohn proved an amazing theorem in 70s that if L has a factorization which uses non-commutative rational functions, then it also has a factorization which uses only polynomials. Okay. L will have a factorization into k times m, but the entries of k and m will only be polynomials in x1 to xn instead of being rational functions. So such a theorem is not true in the commutative setting. Okay. So here's an example. So consider this 3 by 3 matrix. It's over two variables x and y, and let's say x and y are commuting variables. Then this matrix has rank 2. It's singular, right? Because it's a skew symmetric matrix. Its determinant is 0. Okay. So this matrix has a factorization k times m.
Maybe it should y and 1 should be
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. Thanks. Yeah. So it's a skew symmetric. It's singular. So it has a factorization where the entries of k, so it's 3 by 2, 2 by 3, and the entries here are the rational functions, commutative rational functions. But this matrix has no factorization if you only allow polynomial entries in k and m. So does not exist if k and m polynomial entries. Okay. I mean, this needs to be proved. It's a lemma. So non-commutative in the setting of non-commutative algebra, this is a very strong theorem. This does not hold in the commutative setting. It's a non-trivial theorem. It does not stop here. Okay. So you can further assume that the entries of K and M are linear polynomials, are affine forms. Okay. You don't need to go to the higher degree, like to cancel stuff and so on. Okay. So L will have a factorization where the entries of K and M are affine forms, degree 1 polynomials.
So what are the properties of K and M? I forgot.
So L, well, I mean, we are trying to factorize L into K and M. K is n by n minus 1 matrix, and M is n minus 1 by n matrix.
Missed it. L has entered affine forms in the non-commutative.
Yeah, L is a linear polynomial. Yes. So yeah, it's saying that if L is a linear polynomial and if it's singular, in the factorization you can assume that K and M are linear. Okay.
Is this part true?
Oh,
Even this part is not true in the commutative setting.
L is singular there, right?
Sorry, L is singular. Yes, yes. Yeah. So,
Oh, I see.
yeah, L is I mean, this is a chain of theorem. Okay, L is singular. Yeah, that's also not. I mean, none of these implications is true in the commutative setting.
So how is this proved, by the way?
No, yeah, this needs to be proved. I mean, there's this notion of weak algorithm over the non-commutative polynomials. I mean, yeah, I can explain it to you after. So he didn't stop there. Okay, there's more structure in the non-commutative setting. There exists scalar matrices B and C such that BLC has a Hall blocker. What do I mean? There exists invertible matrices over the underlying field B and C such that BLC will have a huge block of zeros. Okay, there will be a block of zeros in BLC of dimension I cross J, where I plus J is greater than n. Okay, so it's easy to see if your matrix has a block of such a huge block of zeros, it will be singular. Okay, and this is the only way to generate singular matrices in the non-commutative case. And yeah, this is the analog of Hall's theorem for perfect match for bipart graphs. Okay, so yeah, so there is amazing structure in the non-commutative setting.
So n is the dimension of L.
Yes, n is the dimension of L. Okay, so the singular problem is given this matrix L, test whether it's singular or not. Okay, and Kohn proved in the 70s that the non-commutative rational identity testing for formula representations reduces to this problem singular. Okay, so this is analog of variance determinantal representation of commutative formulas but before variant. Okay.
Okay, maybe just because the inverse of L can represent any rational.
Yes, I mean, yeah, the proof is that, well, yeah, inverse of L can represent any rational function. Yeah. Okay, so this is the problem, and we prove that singular is in polynomial time when the underlying field is rational numbers, and then next talk, KV will talk about the result that singular is in P for all large enough fields. Okay. Okay. So, any questions?
We have this characterization of singular.
Yes. Yes.
And you check whether it is a polynomial.
Yeah, we can check this condition in polynomial time. Okay. So next I'll restate the problem singular in simple commutative linear algebra terms. Okay, so if you lost me anywhere, there's the time to tune back in if you want to. So okay, so simple linear algebra. So here's a definition. Let's say a subspace V of f to the n is shrunk by this matrices A1 to Am if there exists a subspace W whose dimension is smaller than dimension of V, and each AI maps V into W. Okay, so there exists a subspace. So this subspace V is shrunk into a smaller subspace simultaneously by all A1 to An. So then we call that this subspace V of f to the n is shrunk by A1 to An. Okay, is the definition clear? Okay, and testing. So So the Hall blocker characterization that you can translate into this form. So singular testing for L equals summation xi ai is the same as testing if A1 to AM admit a shrunk subspace. If A1 to AM admit a shrunk subspace, they simultaneously shrunk some subspace, then L will be singular, otherwise it won't be singular.
But singular means formal determinant is 0, is it?
There is no determinant in the non-commutative setting. Determinant doesn't make sense. Singular means that the rank is small over this freeze 2 field.
Here there is no non-commutative.
Yes, so we reduced a hardcore non-commutative algebra, I mean not we, Kohn reduced this hardcore non-commutative algebra problem into a simple commutative linear algebra problem.
But there is a notion of determinant over non-commuting variables.
Yeah, you can consider as quasi-determinants, which are basically entries of matrix inverse. So basically you need to replace determinant with inverse in the non-commutative setting.
And that is sharply hard to compute.
No. I mean matrix inverse you can still.
No, but Shikant has some.
No, that's a different notion of determinant. That doesn't really.
Yeah, that's okay. That's called the Cayley determinant, but that doesn't tell you. I mean, that has no connection to the structure of L.
So when you say singular, you don't mean that determinant.
No. Singular means this matrix
Product.
L.
The product can be factored like that.
Yeah, that can be factored.
N times N.
I guess
Why
it's
not
not
call it
even a
reducible?
polynomial.
There's-
Determinant is a
It's
polynomial
not
that captures
polynomial.
Yes.
and this fact is false
It's
over
not only
non-commutative.
Yes.
polynomial in non-commutative.
So what's the definition of singular?
Okay, let me go back.
Well, he calls it non-full.
So L is singular if its rank is smaller than n over this freeze 2 field. Or in other words, it can be factorized into k times m, where k and m are smaller dimension matrices. Okay, but again, you don't have to think about it. You can think
Rank
of.
was what?
Sorry.
What was rank?
So Nitin, so when you think of a matrix in a commutative sense, right, and you say that this matrix has rank less than n, what do you mean? You mean that you can decompose it into outer products?
Yeah.
So,
But,
yeah.
but do you have a definition of rank?
So it can be defined.
Independent definition of rank.
It can be defined as row rank or column rank, but you have to be a bit careful.
Okay.
It can be defined. Yeah, all those things. General. I mean, the only difference is that the field we are working over is non-commutative. We're still working over field, but just a non-commutative field. So most of the things generalize.
No, but if the rank is R, can you not decompose it as n times R times
Yes.
n?
Yeah, that's
Yes,
what
yeah.
I said in this slide. This is exactly the second bullet.
So that is the definition of R.
Yes.
That's the definition.
That's
of
one definition of R. Okay. Right.
So that this is the definition of rank for you.
Yes.
Singular. The definition of singular. So basically it should reduce.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Reducible in
Yes.
terms of multiplication.
Yeah, but you don't have to think about it. You can think of in terms of these chunks of spaces. Okay. Yes. So you given a bunch of matrices over a field, and you just want to check if they simultaneously shrink some subspace or not. Okay. That problem is exactly equivalent to this problem as proved by amazing theorems of Kohn. Okay.
This was his definition.
Yeah. Yeah, singular testing for this L is exactly testing if A1 to AM admit a shrunk subspace.
So what Ankit is saying is that you pick your definition of rank over any field, right? And here we're just dealing with free skew field, but pick your definition of rank over any field, which is what Ketan said, like we have a factorization.
But now by field you mean non-commutative field.
Yeah, non-commutative, but you pick the same definition and you define that as the rank of a matrix.
I mean,
So
it's the right definition. I mean,
Yeah, so-
I mean, you can define it as row rank, you can define it as column rank, you can define it this way. They're all equivalent.
And then what Kohn proved is that all of these definitions, they are all equivalent to the shrunk subspace one as well. This is a sequence of theorems. It's not obvious at all that.
Yeah, these are highly non-trivial theorems.
Like it's the last thing of you see that the shrunk subspace is equivalent to the Hall blocker.
Yeah, I mean that's simple linear algebra. Yeah. So, okay.
In the commutative case, the determinant capturing this is a miracle, but here you have three other miracles.
Yes, there are other
Yeah,
miracles
here
there.
you have a lot more, yeah.
So rank over this non-commutative field will be defined via the free module, or
I mean, one way to define it is in terms of factorization.
there is no vector space here if your field is
But you're working over a division ring, right? So you do have inverse.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, everything has an inverse.
Except over division.
Okay, so and this problem is also testing if these matrices are in the null cone of the left-right action. This is what we will talk about in the next talk. Okay. All right. So that was the problem.
From that, can you go back? From just that thing, do you get any like if you are given AIs, do you get any bound on the bit length of the specification of the Shrunk subspace right away or no?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know
you
that.
See that it is in NP right away from cons thing.
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't see how you directly get a bound on the bit lengths of this shunt subspace.
Not directly, is it?
Yeah. I mean, their algorithm does produce a shunt subspace and it's polynomial time, so it has polynomial bit length. But I don't know how to prove it directly.
Oh, right, is it?
If I talk in terms of left-right action, then you will see.
Ah, yeah, actually,
Okay.
Just guess.
Okay, so I'll move on to the algorithm. Okay, so I'll fix my field to be Q. Okay, and I'll talk about this doubly stochastic condition. Okay. Now my field is Q. My matrices A1 to Am are n by n matrices over a field Q. So I call this collection doubly stochastic if these two conditions hold. Summation AI transpose is identity and summation AI transpose AI is identity. If these two conditions are satisfied by my A1 to Am, then I call them doubly stochastic. Okay. And Gurwitz proved that if these two conditions are satisfied by my A1 to Am, then A1 to Am will never admit any shunt subspace. Okay. In other words, the rank of summation xi AI will be full. Okay. So this is basically one-page proof using linear algebra, but I mean intuitively it's more natural to think about quantum operators, but I won't go into this talk. Okay. So this is the result, and this is also true in an approximate sense. Okay. So what do I mean? So you want your matrices summation AI transpose to be approximately identity and summation AI transpose AI to be approximately identity. Okay. So you can define a measure how far are this A1 to Am from being doubly stochastic. So one measure is this. Anything reasonable will also work. So you measure the trace of summation AI transpose minus identity square plus trace of summation AI transpose AI minus identity square. Okay. If this thing is small, then these two conditions are almost identity. Okay, and I say that these matrices are close to being doubly stochastic.
So in that case, do you get? Is there a smooth trade-off that if this quantity is less than something, then the rank has reached something?
Yeah. So actually, there's a rigid condition. So if this condition is smaller than 1 over n square, then the rank is still full. Okay.
And if it's slightly larger, then you say something
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Okay, so Gurwitz also proved that if this doubly stochastic measure is smaller than 1 over n square, then the rank will be full. Okay, A1 to Am admit no shunt subspace. So another condition is that this property of shunt subspace is invariant under the left-right action. Okay, so what do I mean? If you multiply pre and post multiply by invertible matrices, this property of having a shrink subspace doesn't change. Okay, you pick B and C be invertible matrices, then A1 to Am admit a shunt subspace, no shunt subspace if and only if this matrices B, A1, C and so on admit no shunt subspace. Okay, this is invariant under this action. It's clear. Okay? These are invertible matrices. Okay, so restating Gurwitz, you also get this theorem. If there exists invertible matrices B and C such that the doubly stochastic measure is smaller than 1 over n square, then A1 to Am admit no shrunk subspace. Okay. Just because it's invariant under this action. And it turns out that this is an if and only if condition. A1 to Am admit no shrunk subspace if and only if there exists invertible matrices B and C such that the doubly stochastic measure is smaller than 1 over n square, or this collection of matrices is almost doubly stochastic. So this characterizes, so in some sense shrunk subspace was giving you a co-NP proof, this is giving you an NP proof. Okay. So morally this problem is already in NP intersection co-NP. Okay, so now the goal is just this. You're given n by n matrices, you want to determine if there exists invertible B and C such that for the matrices B1 to Bm, which are B, A1, C, and so on, they are almost doubly stochastic. This is your goal.
You say morally because you don't know what the entries in BNC are.
Yes, we don't know the bit length. But maybe.
If you need want them to be small, you probably can just always assume that BNC are very small. You only want the distance to be small. You don't have a rigid kind of property.
Yeah, maybe.
You can assume by truncation.
You can assume by truncation.
By truncation, you can assume that is
Yeah. But yeah, okay.
And this is what Ankit is going to do later.
No, well, okay.
We won't talk about it.
Yeah, I won't talk about it. But I don't see for the other condition, for the shrunk
So
subspace.
what is it? Now you're trying to see if there is a shrunk subspace, right?
Well, no, yeah, I reduced it to this problem. So basically, I'm not trying to witness a shrunk subspace. I'm trying to witness that there is no shrunk subspace. And Gurvitz proved that there is actually a witness for this. If there exists invertible matrices B and C, such that when you look at B1 to Bm, which are B, A1, C, basically you pre and post multiply your A1 to AM by this B and C, then these almost become doubly stochastic. If this is true, then there will be no shrunk subspace in A1 to AM. Okay.
Is it even only?
What about the converse?
Is it even only or what?
This is if and only. This is if and only. A1 to AM admit no shrunk subspace if and only if there exists invertible matrices such that these are almost doubly stochastic. So this gives you a witness for no shrunk subspace. Okay.
Oh, that is remarkable.
Yeah. This is actually remarkable.
Can you say a few words about the?
So actually, you sort of don't really need. I mean, this proof actually follows from an algorithm. Okay, the algorithm I'll show you. Okay, you only need one direction. The other direction follows from the algorithm. Okay, so we want to ensure this. So it turns out you can always ensure one of these conditions. Okay, just by normalization. Okay, for example, if you take your B to be summation AI transpose to the power minus half, then this summation bi transpose is exactly identity. Okay, this is just normalization. Okay, maybe I'll give you time to verify this. Okay.
So B and C to be that.
Oh, sorry. C is identity. C is identity. Yeah. Just multiply on the left by this summation ai transpose to the minus half. Okay. Then this will ensure that summation bi transpose is identity. Just normalization. Okay. You can also take C to be the other way around, summation ai transpose ai to the minus half and B to be identity. This ensures the other condition, summation bi transpose bi is identity. So you can always ensure one of these two conditions and you want to ensure both of them simultaneously, okay, if it's possible or not. So I'll call this left normalization if I take B to be this, C to be identity, and the other right normalization. And I want to ensure both of them simultaneously, then the algorithm is the simplest thing you can imagine. Okay? So maybe I'll let you guys discover what the algorithm is. So what do you think we should do?
Left, right, left, right, left.
Yes. And that's the algorithm. You left normalize, right normalize, left normalize, right normalize, and you do this for a polynomial number of steps. Finally, you get some output matrices A1 tilde to AM tilde. You check if they are almost doubly stochastic. If they are, you output there is no shrunk subspace. If they are not doubly stochastic, you output there is a shrunk subspace. So this is the algorithm. Okay. So actually, this algorithm was already suggested by Gurvitz in 2004. The point is that we prove that this actually works. Okay. That this actually converges in polynomial number of steps. And this is a sort of a non-commutative extension of matrix scaling algorithms by Sinkhorn and Lineal, Samarinsky and Vigderson. Okay, so yeah, if you know about it, this.
So these matrices which you get in the end, are they close to rank 1 matrices or?
No, not really. I mean, the rank doesn't really change because you're just multiplying by invertible matrices, right? So you're just multiplying this A1 to AM on the left and the right by invertible matrices.
But if you assume A1 to AM to have non-negative entries.
No, they are not assumed to have non-negative entries.
Suppose we assume that
Okay.
we having non-negative entries, then it seems that in the end you end up with 0 or 1 entries.
But still, the rank doesn't change, right? Because we're just multiplying by invertible matrices.
Yeah, invertible.
So as a follow-up to the question, and excuse my ignorance, but So there is no connection in the non-commutative between rank and invertible. So I mean, we don't have to assume something like full rank or something like that.
Oh, you mean this ones? Why these are invertible?
Yes, I mean.
Yeah, but you can show that if these are not invertible themselves, then there is a shrunk subspace. Basically, you shrink the full subspace. So you can assume that these are invertible. Was that your question?
It was close. I guess you already answered it.
Okay, so this is the algorithm, and we prove that it works. So how do you prove it works? You need a potential function. Okay? And the potential function that we use is something called the capacity of this matrix is A1 to Am. Okay? So what is the capacity? So you look at the action of this matrices on a matrix X. Okay? So you look at summation AI X AI transpose. You compute its determinant, and you see how much this action shrinks the determinant. So it's infimum of determinant of summation AI X AI transpose such that the determinant of X was originally 1. How much the determinant is being shrunk by this map. Okay? That's your notion of, that's a potential function we use. So some lemmas, I won't go into the proof. So the capacity is always bounded by 1 after some normalization. The capacity always increases by a factor of 1 plus 1 over n squared as long as you're far from being doubly stochastic, and the capacity is lower bounded by some factor if the A1 to Am admit no shrunk subspace. Okay? So these are 3 lemmas. Capacity is bounded by 1, it always increases as long as you're far from being doubly stochastic, it's lower bounded when A1 to Am are full, and so this process has to stop after polynomial number of steps. It's multiplicatively increases, and really this is the main contribution. These are not hard to prove. Proving that capacity is lower bounded by below by an exponential minus poly n factor. So any questions about? Yes.
Is there some intuition for why this capacity is the right?
So if you look at this map, X being sent to summation AI X AI transpose, so it's easy to show that if A1 to Am are not full, then they will decrease the rank of some X. Okay. There exists a rank X, so the rank is decreased, and somehow determinant is a nice proxy for rank. So that's why you're looking at how much you're shrinking the determinant. Basically, capacity will be 0 if these are not full, and it's bounded below by some factor if these are full. Okay. So I won't go into the proof, but let me say so the main ingredient in our proof. Okay. So
Edmond's problem, what lower bound could be used for his capacity when you solve the Edmond's problem?
So he doesn't need. So Gurwitz proved lower bound for a special case. Okay. So let's just talk about this offline. He didn't prove this general theorem. He only proved it for a special case. Okay. So going back to our goal. Our goal was to test if this matrix summation xi ai is singular, non-singular. Okay. A natural algorithm for this is you plug in matrix values for this non-commuting variables xi. Okay. So what I mean, you choose random matrices b1 to bm of dimension d and check whether the determinant of summation bi tensor ai is non-zero. And this actually works fine. The only question is how large do we need to take d? And before our work, the bounds on d were exponential in n. Okay. So although these bounds give an exponential time algorithm, but still this is crucial in analysis. So we able to use this exponential bound on the dimension to give a polynomial time algorithm.
Why do you have tensor product?
What does it mean to plug in xi, right?
Could it be the matrix product?
No.
You get this Kronecker product.
Oh, you want to multiply xi with each entry of AI?
Yes. Matrix product is not the right thing. The right thing is to take tensor product. Okay.
So by the result, Dirksen-McCann result, it means that you can take the polynomial, right?
Yes. So what Ketan is saying that so recently, actually independently of our work, Dirksen and McCann showed that D equals n plus 1 suffices for this algorithm. You can plug in random n plus 1 by n plus 1 matrices and check whether the determinant is non-zero. Okay. So this already gives a very natural randomized polynomial time algorithm. And I mean, they use the techniques from Ivanish, Shah and Subramanian. This is their previous paper. Okay. I guess KV will talk about this also. And so after that, IQS 15b, they gave a deterministic polynomial time algorithm using this approach, which works over all large enough weights. And this is what KV will talk about in the next talk.
So they also do this left-right thing?
No. So their algorithm is completely different. It's the analog of augmenting paths for perfect match. Okay. Okay. So this is all I'll say about our algorithm, and I'll end up with some conclusion and open problems. So any questions up to now? Okay. Yes.
Go back. Great. So go back more. Okay. So you have this. I mean, I'm really tired. Why does this? Okay. So you're saying if it's full, the capacity is 0, or you said this?
When it's not full.
Not full, it's 0.
Yes.
And then okay. So basically, you do your matrix scaling, and if it's not full, it's always 0.
Yeah.
And then if it's full, it has this bound, and then you do some stuff, and then eventually you get.
It keeps increasing and it stops at some point when you get doubly stochastic.
Okay, and then you just check it at a point.
Yeah. So. Yeah. In the end, you check whether this doubly stochastic measure is smaller than 1 over n squared.
Okay. But in terms of like the new. Okay, so you prove this theorem for the lower bound of the capacity. And you're using this degree bound.
We're using the exponential degree bound.
Okay, and if you use the polynomial degree bound, but how does theorem 3?
So if you use that, this becomes to the polylog n. But I mean, it improves the running time of the algorithm maybe from n to the 4 to n to the n squared.
But doesn't it make it parallel?
No. So the capacity is increasing very slowly. It only increasing by a factor of 1 plus 1 over n squared. So you still have this n square. Yeah.
So finally, you get identity testing for formulas, non-commutative formulas, or circuits.
Formulas.
And circuits is harder.
Circuits is harder. Circuits is even not known without divisions. Even if you have no division gates in your circuit, it's not known deterministically how to test.
No, but is it known to be in X? Is there some con kind of thing for circuits also?
No. I mean, con really doesn't care about circuits, right? They only care about formulas and matrices and so on. I mean, circuits is what we define.
So for circuits, what is the base known right now?
Exponential.
In randomized polynomial time, if you bound the degree, if you don't bound the degree, then exponential time. Yes.
Is there I mean, do you know of candidate, what are the matrices given through AM that actually achieve this lower bound? I mean, are they...
Oh, actually, you can improve this lower bound using the recent results. That's all.
Just like what sort of matrices actually have very low, is there an intuition for...
Very low capacity.
Right.
Okay, so if you consider the example, that example is sort of the counterexample for all of these cases. So that's sort of the worst bad example. I mean, when there's a difference in notions of commutative rank and non-commutative rank, then sort of that's the main difficulty in the problem. When these two notions match, there's a duality, and then it's easier to. I mean, that's what Gurwitz proved in his paper. He solved the special case when the commutative rank and the non-commutative rank match. So when these notions differ, that's sort of the harder case. And one of the cases where they differ is that matrix over here.
I mean, like, there's a similar thing where if you have a doubly stochastic matrix, the permanent is lower bounded by something.
Yes.
Those sort of matrices are well described. So I was wondering if that sort of...
This is too hard.
So I'm going to start. So in this, you say after so many steps, you get the capacity is around 1.
Yes.
And then that implies that this doubly stochastic is big.
No. So the point is that capacity keeps increasing unless the doubly stochastic is small. So
okay. Oh, okay.
After polynomial number steps, you have to you have to have doubly stochastic being small. Otherwise, the capacity was 0. Okay, so how much time do we have?
How much time do we need?
Okay. Let's move on to open problems. The conclusion. So the point is that this is an analytic algorithm for a purely algebraic problem. Okay, and maybe for some other PIT tests, maybe we should also look for some analytic algorithms as well. Okay. This shows that polynomial degree bounds are not really essential to prove to put algebraic geometric problems in P. we didn't have polynomial degree bounds, we had exponential degree bounds, but we still solved the null cone of the left reduction in P. So of course, for this problem, this is not as essential as KB will talk. Now there are polynomial degree bonds, but maybe for other problems this could be useful. Okay, where there are exponential degree bonds, but maybe you can still put the problem in P. Okay, so open problems. So one obvious open problem is give a randomized polynomial time algorithm for non-commutative circuits where you don't bound the degree of the polynomial. Okay, so the main problem here is that we don't know such a theorem. So here's a conjecture: if a non-commutative polynomial is non-zero and it's computed by a non-commutative circuit of size S, then there exist matrices B1 to Bm of dimension poly S such that P evaluated on B1 to Bm is non-zero. So this is a very natural conjecture. So to remind you, what we know is if the degree of this polynomial is bounded, if the degree is D, then there exists matrices B1 to Bm of dimension D over 2 plus 1 such that the polynomial is non-zero. But of course, if the circuit size is S, the degree could be exponential. But I don't think those are the hard cases for this Mitsu-Levitsky. Okay, I think yeah, this conjecture should be true, and this would be really nice. Okay, so this is the first open problem. Questions? Okay. The next one is our algorithm and also the algorithm KB will describe. They are both white box algorithms. They need to look at this matrices A1 to AM to test singularity. Can we design heating sets for this problem singular? What do I mean? So by heating set I mean there's a set S of tuples of poly and dimension matrices such that whenever for any non-singular L equals summation xi ai, there exists a tuple from the set B1 to Pm such that the determinant of summation bi tensor ai is non-zero. So this is what I mean by heating set. And so our algorithms don't achieve this, they are white box, and it would be very nice to design such heating sets. So one caution, this question actually captures parallel algorithms for perfect matching in bipartite graphs and also heating sets for non-commutative ABPs as special cases. So it won't be easy, but now we have these algorithms, and this is the next natural step.
So what is that fourth sentence now?
So if you could achieve this, you would get a de-randomized parallel algorithm for perfect matching in bipartite graphs, and this model is stronger than non-commutative ABPs. So
so you get perfect matching for bipartite graphs because what?
Basically you have a bipartite graph. You take elementary matrices for each edge, Eij, and that problem, singularity for that problem is okay.
But also for general graphs, right?
Not general graphs, only for bipartite graphs.
Why not?
So for general graphs, the non-commutative rank and the commutative rank notions differ. So there's a duality for so I can explain this often, but it doesn't capture general graphs, only captures bipartite graphs. So that's good.
Because the intuition just by the singularity is captured by the Hall's condition.
Yes. Okay, so it won't be easy, but we have this algorithm. So this is the next natural step. This is also related to the NNL problem for the left right action, which Ketan mentioned. Okay. I think this probably would imply this, but I'm not sure. Okay, so this is a very natural problem. Any questions? Okay. The next one is can we design syntactic proofs of rational expressions being equivalent to zero? Okay. What do I mean? So Kohn and Rothenauer in 1999 proved that if a rational expression is equivalent to zero, then by syntactic manipulations over the underlying field, you can convert R into zero. Okay. So I won't go into what are the field axioms and all, but let me give you an example. Okay. So here's an identity over in two variables, two non-commutative variables, which is called Hoover's identity. Okay. And let me show you a proof by syntactic manipulations, and it will be clear what do I mean. So we have this expression. We take x inverse out. Okay, we get something, and now I replace this one by 1 plus yx inverse times 1 plus yx inverse whole inverse. Okay, and then I'll take this 1 plus yx inverse whole inverse common, and just of addition, right? And I'll get something, and I'll take this yx inverse inside, I'll get something, and then these two expressions are the same by commutativity of addition, okay? And this is 0. I mean, maybe you won't get the proof, but you get the idea what kind of syntactic manipulations I'm making, okay? I'm using commutativity of addition, distributivity, and also, so the most important point is I'm using the fact that 1 equals G inverse, okay? So you're allowed to use 1 equals G inverse for any valid rational, for any non-zero rational expression G. Of course, if you use 1 equals 0 inverse, you can prove anything. So you can use 1 equals G inverse for non-zero rational expression G, okay? And then you can convert such expressions to 0. So this is a very natural proof system. There are obvious questions. Are the proofs always polynomial in size? Are there connections to other proof systems, to what Pavel mentioned and Guido mentioned, right? So it's a very interesting problem. I mean, I haven't really thought very long about it, but I think it's very interesting if the proofs are always polynomial in size or not. Yes.
So by syntactic, do you mean that you have a rewriting system for proving that it's 0? You have a
So yeah, I mean, yeah, by syntactic I mean exactly this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the kind of manipulations I did here, you use the field axioms and you use 1 equals G inverse and so on. And using these manipulations, you can reduce this expression to 0. That's what I did.
Do you have any upper bound in the dimension of the matrix algebra when it is equal to functional properties?
So
maybe we take it off.
Okay.
I just want to substitute from that big algebra, and if it is identically 0 there, then it is syntactic algebra. Do you know any bound on that dimension of the
I'm not sure about. Yeah, let's take off. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
It's offline. We reconvene at 10:45.